And I think, like Sarah, I probably could spend all day talking about so many of the issues that have been affecting the greater Newburyport area and climate change. So what I'm going to do is the top level response is talk for a while about what we have accomplished in Newburyport, and then I too am very, very concerned about CSOs being at the end of the Merrimack River. So talk for a little bit about that also. So let me just get this slideshow going. Is it this one? Yeah, I can do it here. And I hit which one? Arrow, this arrow? Okay. Terrific. Okay, ready to go. For those of you who aren't that familiar with Newburyport, we are a very small coastal community in Essex County, 35 miles northeast of Boston, and our population, we've been at 17,000 for forever. That's what you always hear, but actually we're at 18,003. We've, in terms of our population, we have a vibrant tourism, boating, expansive parks, beaches, business and industrial park. And for better or for worse, we own part of Plum Island. So you take office in January of 10, and you have these terms just all over the place: resiliency, climate change, global warming, storm surge, sustainability, rising sea levels, and you have various opinions, people telling you all these different things that you need to do, you need to address, don't listen to those people, these are myths. And what do you do as a leader of a community in terms of trying to get your arms around all of these issues? And it doesn't take long to realize that all you have to do is wait through one of our winters or one of these storms that we've had, and you can see the impact that climate change has had on our community. So first thing you do is you have to educate yourself as a leader. I spent a tremendous amount of time reading, listening, talking, attending seminars, and building that knowledge base. Then next, it's really critical that you surround yourself with strong teams, knowledgeable people, not people who agree with everything that you believe in, but people who are going to help you see the full picture and understand what the impact of climate change is on your community and how we have to move forward. And then you begin with innovation, you begin with hiring grant writers, bringing people together who can advance really important issues in your community. So let me just step back a little bit and share with you some of the highlights of our city and things that we have done. We had the largest municipal solar array installed in 2004 on top of our middle school. Working with Amoresco was a very exciting project and has been upgraded when we renovated the Knockmullen School a few years back, and really, really pleased that we have taken such a major lead in terms of solar in our city. In 2005, there was this citizen group that came together called SEED, or the Seacoast Energy and Environmental Design Coalition. Some of you might remember that. It was around for a few years, but I think it really was one of the first community activist group that came together that started to present information to our community about things that we really needed to pay attention to. And then in 2007, the Energy Advisory Committee was established, and they have been a tremendous, I can't emphasize enough, tremendous resource to our community in terms of the level of expertise. These are working professionals in the field. They help lead us through so many initiatives, in particular, we were one of the first communities to purchase our streetlights from National Grid and convert to LED, working with us on electrical aggregation. I mean, just so many issues, our solarized mass programs. So if you don't have in your community an energy advisory committee, I would recommend that you move that forward. Another was we were so excited. I was on the city council at this point, and we were so excited about Mark Ritchie coming into our community, who is a really terrific woodworker and took over the old Owens, Illinois building that was really sitting there crumbling. And we were so excited about having our first wind turbine in the city and rushed to put our ordinances together. And then we didn't realize that there is the blades, and then there's this neighborhood up here in Hillside. And so we ran into some issues with the neighborhood in terms of flicker and noise. But since then, we've all sort of learned to live in harmony. And after a couple minor lawsuits, things are moving forward. But we haven't necessarily put a lot of wind turbines in the city. Certainly, there's been requests to do so. But again, I think you have to have the space and the land to do so. But it'd be nice to see them all along the 95 corridor. Other things that we've done, which I think are significant in terms of some highlights, is that, obviously, like so many communities, we're having a lot of issues, especially now with the Chinese sword that's been passed in terms of recycling. But we did separate our disposal costs and into a single stream. At one point, we were receiving revenue, like most communities, from recycling, and now we're paying for that. We did initiate a very, very successful organics program, because we know that there is probably anywhere between, I'm hearing 45 to 60% of your trash is organics. And if you can take that out, and we have a farm that picks up our organics with these little buckets that you'll see, the little green bucket on the corner there, picks them up once a week and takes them to the farm. I really encourage you. I am maybe every other week putting out trash at this point with the organics and recycling program. We've also done great work in terms of collecting and recycling mattresses and bicycles, and we have a sister city in Africa, and we've been sending our old computers and school equipment there too, which has been really, it's positive on both ends. It doesn't go into the landfill, and it also gets reused in another community. Love our place-based education. I see John up in the corner there, who has really taken this off. It was an offshoot of the Gulf of Maine Institute, where we're really doing great things with students at the high school, and I'm excited that they're coming in a little while to do some more work here. Really real-world experiences that they tackle, dealing with Phragmites and invasive species. They set up a program at one point where they were using our wastewater treatment facility to test the water quality, and I'd like to bring that back now. And we'll talk about a little more about CSOs in a little bit, but it really helps to advance, I think, and channel some of the energy that these kids have about wanting to take care of the environment and make a commitment. It's been wonderful. The picture in the middle here, Lauren, she won an award for creating a green roof, and she still comes back periodically and participates in our energy advisory committee work. We became a green community, as so many others, and took a lot of that money and invested into our municipal buildings, which are, obviously needing some help in terms of upgrades. We also, as I mentioned earlier, converted to LED streetlights, and also have introduced some EV charging stations, and know that we have to continue to advance that. We've worked with Mass Save in promoting people to come in and have energy audits in their homes. Also developed a carbon challenge early on, which we are continuing, and I'll talk about in a little bit more. Solarized Mass, for the small city, we are one of the top communities in terms of recruiting people to put solar on their homes. We have those solar bellies in several places within the community, and have turned some of our crossing lights are being powered by solar now also. We entered into a net metering contract, a huge contract with, it was initially True North, but I believe it's been sold a few times, with Salisbury and Triton School District, and that's been a very positive for the city. We use that savings, particularly with our high electric users, like our wastewater treatment facility. Had to put in about our farmers market because we know that this is so helpful to our environment, supporting our farms, learning, where our food is coming from, reducing our carbon footprint. We could go on and on about the importance of supporting our farms and our local food. And then we come to one of the greatest challenges in our community, which is coastal resiliency. These pictures are just, I think they tell their own story in terms of the kinds of things that we're dealing with and have dealt with on Plum Island, and it's only going to continue to raise more and more challenges. Grateful for another group that formed in our community, Storm Surge, that came together in 2013. Again, a group of concerned citizens who came together, and they have brought some amazing scientists, like the scientists we had this morning from UNH speaking, to come and talk about very targeted, specific topics relating to storm surge and climate change, and has really done a fabulous job in educating the broader Newburyport community in terms of some of these issues. This is Cashman Park, where our boat ramp is, if you're not familiar, which this is not uncommon to see during heavy rains, and I'm sure it's going to continue to get worse. We also worked with the Meister Group and the Mass Clean Energy Center. We had a small grant to begin to develop a sustainability roadmap. That was, again, brought many residents together from the greater Newburyport area to begin to talk about some of the challenges in our community. There was a program, I'm not sure if it's still existing, but it was a community builders program that was a federal program you could apply for. And there were 7 or 8 federal agencies, and depending on what your needs were, you could bring these agencies into your community to help you do an evaluation of some of your challenges and needs. And we worked with Federal Department of Transportation, Housing and Urban Development, and the EPA, and they came and spent 2.5 days with us, traveled around our community, identified some of the vulnerabilities as well as assets, and really set, I think, the tone for us to move forward to where we are today. Another really, I think, wonderful thing that happened for me was to be called by the Union of Concerned Scientists back in the summer of 15 and asking if I would come to a 3-day brainstorming session with coastal mayors from across the country. It was a wonderful, wonderful weekend to meet with mayors from Tybee Island and Georgia and Miami. And in the picture you'll see me standing there, that's Mayor Dawn Zimmer. I knew I'd remember her name I don't think she's still the mayor of Hoboken, but she presented information on what happened when Sandy breached both sections of Hoboken in her city and what the challenges that she was dealing with. And I think one of the most important pieces that came out of that weekend was how challenging the regulations that we all are dealing with in terms of trying to take care of our cities. Moving sand. My God, this is like one of the most difficult things in the world to do. To have dredging materials placed where you need them. No, I'm sorry, you don't have the right kind of permitting for that. We got to put it way over there, and then it's going to cost you another $60,000 to move it where you want. And this was happening all across the country, and I'm hoping that we can begin to make some changes in this. But that is the link there where there were to discuss all the things that we talked about that day with that weekend with the Union of Concerned Scientists, who continue to still be very active in this area. So right after that weekend, it was important for me to realize that we needed a sustainability and resiliency plan in Newburyport. So I put together an ad hoc resiliency group that is still actively meeting and working on our resiliency plan. And that's just some of the pictures from that. And of course, the FEMA map, which will probably change in 2 months anyway. It's like every time you close your eyes, there's another piece of data coming out that changes what we currently know. And then this was absolutely another wonderful thing that happened to our greater communities was this Great Marsh Adaptation Planning, or the Sandy Grant, as we all called it, that ran for several years with representatives from communities around the Great Marsh. And out of that grant came, really solid information for the city of Newburyport in terms of what are our assets and what are our vulnerabilities. And that led directly into, which is what Sarah was talking about earlier, was the MVP process. And that was a grant that we received that we are we finally certified, Ellie, at this point? Are we close to being? We're certified, okay, because we were working towards that. I wasn't sure if the certification came. So we hired the Horsley Witten group, who worked with us around, bringing the community together to talk about some of the vulnerabilities and really rank these things in terms of what we were challenged with in terms of taking care of. We had these maps, FEMA maps, for all the different groups that came together and identified where our greatest vulnerabilities were. And it was wonderful to see that we had a lot of consistency across the groups in terms of where our concerns. One of our biggest concerns, I think for me, one of the greatest concerns is the fact that we just completed a $37 million renovation of our wastewater treatment plant, which sits right on the Merrimack River. Now, again, these things are designed, I think they started designing this in 2002. We didn't have the same information we have today. Certainly, would we have designed this differently? If, today, if we were starting the construction, absolutely, but then it probably would cost $60 million instead of 37 today if we started. But one of the challenges about the wastewater treatment plant, not only is it absolutely critical, a piece of infrastructure for our treatment of sewage, and we have separated our stormwater from our sewer many, many years ago, so that's not an issue for our community. We're receiving a lot of that, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But the other piece that became problematic for us is that we are in completing phase 2 of our rail trail. Rail trail system is like, people love our rail trail system in the city. And that red dotted line behind the wastewater treatment plant, we found PCBs. And so that's going to cost us probably somewhere between roughly $800,000 to clean that up. We also have to prevent that. We also are putting in some erosion control to prevent that from getting into the river. And we need to raise the rail trail. At the same time, we have an MVP grant to figure out how we protect the wastewater treatment plant from, because it is of where it is and very vulnerable. So we're trying to integrate those two processes to be able to finish the rail trail, clean up the PCBs, prevent them from getting into the river, and protect our wastewater treatment plant. Piece of cake, right? And then, of course, this is not uncommon. What we see during, this is the old Black Cow. They've now moved closer to Merrimack Street, but this is during the Sandy storm. Water was coming right over the roofs of this building, ripped up our docks, and sent a massive boat. Made it seem like a little tugboat in terms of. And this is downtown, but this is what you're seeing as a result of this, the change in weather and the tremendous power of the river in terms of what the kinds of destruction that it can do to our infrastructure. Plum Island is a challenge, will be a challenge, and will continue to be a challenge. I mean, there's no question about it. It's a barrier island. One of the first things that I was tasked with was, find $20 million and fix the jetties. I went, what? So we did a legislative trip to D.C. We were able to meet with then Scott Brown, Senator Kerry, Congressman Tierney. We're supposed to meet with the Army Corps of Engineer headquarters for like 15 minutes, over 2 hours later, as we really pushed for why we needed the jetties repaired. Now, as you know, the jetties were repaired. Now there's controversy because we've seen when you touch anything on Plum Island, it affects somewhere else on the island. I think we all know that. Once the jetties were repaired, we started to see changes in erosion patterns, particularly around Reservation Terrace. Primary dune is totally gone. Totally gone. The neighbors are very, very concerned about what's going to happen next there. So we're trying to move sand, and we won't get into how the challenges of that, as I've already talked about. The other piece is we were supposed to go on Wednesday for another legislative trip to D.C. to try, and you'll see the dredge. Some of you might remember that from 9 years ago. We dredged the river last time. We're trying to convince the Army Corps that they need to dredge the river again, and let's get the sand in beneficial use areas on Salisbury, Newbury, and Newburyport, and Newbury side. So that's our, we had to postpone it because of the passing of President Bush, and we were supposed to go on Wednesday, which of course was a national day of mourning. So nobody was around to meet with us that day. So we will be rescheduling that at the end of January. I just wanted to show a couple slides from 2015. That's the valve pit. We have bringing water and sewer out to Plum Island was highly controversial. It was done. Some of you might know that it was a very bad project that ended up, I had to sue the engineering firm and work with the AG's office to go back in and make some major fixes to particularly the water system and replace all the hydrants that they installed. It was a nightmare. But during 2015, because the valve pits for this proprietary sewer system, the air vac system, were not placed below the frost level or out of the roads, this is what happened to them. They froze solid. We lost the sewer system for 3.5 weeks all along Northern Boulevard and on the ocean and basin side. And since then, we have alarmed the system. We worked with MIT. We brought them in to help us keep water out of the valve pits. We've done a tremendous amount of work to fix the system, and now it's on people's phones. The guys used to have to run around. You see the white candy canes out there for the, that are part of the vacuum system. The way they would tell if there was a problem with the system is they would be running around sticking their ear in the candy canes. So you can imagine when they're all buried in 2015. But this is something that's really important to Plum Island, Newbury, and Newburyport, because this is such a delicate proprietary system. It requires a tremendous amount of knowledge and attention to ensure that this doesn't get, destroyed during one of these storm events. We've been working on dune restoration just as Newbury side has, as Salisbury has. We bring the kids out, we plant dune grass, we direct people through Moby maps onto how to access the beach, trying to work on restoring some of these dunes. But I think one of the most important things in anything you can do as a leader is that you have to be sure, and I think Sarah made mention of this, or maybe even Gabby too, you have to be sure that there's consistency in all of your planning tools. That's one thing we've been able to do with our multi-hazard plan. We do it with multiple communities, and Merrimack Valley helps us with that, but we make sure that it's consistent with our master plan, which was just redone, and also we're just about finishing zoning. And so we want to be sure that all of these plans are consistent, as well as our new MVP plan that we're working on, and our resiliency plan. When our president pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accord, obviously many of us were very, very concerned and continue to be concerned about the statements that he makes about climate change. And I presented a resolution to the city that no matter what happens at a federal level, we will continue to march forward doing all the great work that we're continuing to do. Unanimously supported by the city council, had all of the different groups, Storm Surge, our kids, everybody with us as we proclaim this in the city. As a result of that, I joined the Climate Change Mayors Group, and we have a conference call every month, and I was told that I could request an invitation to Governor Brown and Michael Bloomberg's Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco in September. So I applied and waited and waited and waited and waited, and the invitation came from Governor Brown, and I was so excited to be able to go to this absolutely amazing conference in San Francisco. Over 2,000 people were there from all across the world. This is, I think, the fourth climate change action summit that they have held. And I met mayors from Paris, to Warsaw, from South Africa and Australia. And what was so important about this conference was that it was all about the only way you could get there is if you had an action step. And what we were talking about earlier, some of the speakers, it's all about every day, every decision you make. Do I hop in my car and drive down to the local convenience store for that piece of milk, that carton of milk, or do I get on my bike, or do I walk? What I do, what are the choices I'm making every day to make an impact on what's happening in our climate? There was also that picture of Jerry Brown. They did a powerful exhibit on coal and ice talking about the impact of the coal plants and the work that Michael Bloomberg has done with the Sierra Club in terms of working individually with coal plants across the country, helping them realize that they can switch for cheaper to renewables as opposed to coal. And then talking about what's happening to snow and ice caps, too. It was a very, very powerful exhibit. I think one of the most powerful presentations was an afternoon of all about the impact of climate change on warming of our water. Senator Kerry talked about, for the first time in our history, did we have two significant events happening at the exact same time in the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean, the hurricane and the typhoon. He said that was the first time in our history that we've had two really, really significant events happening. This was in the red, those were mayors from across the world who were invited to Mayor London Breed. She's the new mayor of San Francisco for a reception. And then we come to our beloved Merrimack River. And so what are the current issues? I did share some of the Watershed Council slides with Rusty's permission to have a conversation to close with CSOs and taking care of our river, as that was really the theme today. Obviously, we're all really concerned on the combined sewer overflows, and when you hear about the cost of the infrastructure, it is pretty staggering. Reducing polluted stormwater runoff, protecting riparian land, safeguarding our drinking water, studying unregulated contaminants, and planning for the impacts of climate destabilization. This is a familiar slide that you've already seen. But again, I think it's so simple because it really describes exactly what we're dealing with. Lowell, Lawrence, Haverhill, Fitchburg, Nashua, and Manchester all continue to have CSO activations, and those below that, Newburyport, Amesbury, Salisbury, the ones I'm most concerned about because we are the end users and what we receive downriver is unconscionable. I can't tell you. I am furious about this. And I will not stop advocating for something to happen. Unfortunately, I blindsided our governor at an event on Plum Island and didn't realize he didn't know what a CSO was, and Lieutenant Governor, and and I understand. Again, these are communities that this infrastructure was built 100+ years ago, and we can't be pointing fingers at each of these communities and say, what are you doing? You got to, But we have to be sure that the EPA, that DEP, that people are moving forward. There's nothing more disturbing than what we read this week in the local paper, that a mill building in Lawrence was allowed up to an occupancy permit, and it's discharging sewage directly into the Merrimack River. I called DEP. How can that happen? Well, you can't believe everything you read in the paper. Click. Lawrence, we need you to fix this now. We heard about the increase in precipitation from, all the speakers today. And we know with all this increase in rain, what is going to happen. There's going to be more and more CSOs. The average rainfall is about 47 inches, but I think we're well beyond that this year, given what happened last month. Again, these are slides from the Watershed Council, and thank you for sharing them with me. So what are we talking about for 2018? Again, we are about 4.1 inches above where we were, or 14 inches higher than the average rainfall. Greater Lawrence, for example, I mean, read these numbers. It's staggering in terms of where we are, where we were for a 6-7 year period and where we are for a current year. So what are the implications of this? So we know that we're getting significant sewage coming downstream. And as an end user, as I said, you're going to be hearing from me constantly about this issue until we can make some changes. I know that Lowell uses the Merrimack River for drinking water, and I understand Haverhill's coming on board also. This is concerning, considering what's in the river. E. coli, bacteria, parasites, we could go on and on about the stuff that's coming downriver, never mind needles and everything else. But we need more data. We need to be able to collect and connect more data on economic and health impacts from CSOs coming down the river. We know that there was one study. Rusty, how do you say his name? Jagai. Thank you. One study that showed that there was, after a CSO activation, a 13% increase in gastrointestinal upset and ER visits in Lawrence. We need more information like this. There was a bill that was filed by the federal government in 2008, the Need to Know, which recommended for passage from Congress about CSOs, and then it died. I'm asking Congressman Moulton's local chief of staff, Rick is here, and I've spoken to Kate Mache from Congressman Markey's office, asking them if they could look at this bill and see if they could potentially bring it forward again. But in that bill, they talked about places all over the country and the kinds of deaths and sickness that has happened because of CSOs. Economic impacts really need to be quantified, and I really need some direction and help if any of you have some suggestions on how we might be able to do this. I mean, I've had to close all beaches. We have to warn boaters. What about fishing, clamming? We just recently opened up the clam flats. I don't know about you, but I'm not eating any clams. So how do we pinpoint all these economic losses? We need to be able to do a better job at that. And as we've talked about, increased rainfall will bring increased CSOs and more surge releases. But we also know that there's a lot of options in terms of dealing with stormwater. There's other things we can do besides just standing there waiting for, some billions of dollars to drop from the federal government to change this out. Everything that we can do on a daily basis, something like $7.5 million to the Lawrence Sanitary District, who, if you remember last October, they lost power for a week. So what did that mean to their sewage plant? It all went into the river. That's not a lot of money, and that's a regional plant, $7.5 million to have a backup generator. That's, tight tanks in terms of what Jason was talking about from Nashua and from some of their work, things that can happen. This was a picture that was sent to me from a dog on Plum Island who was in the river after a CSO activation, and look at the sores on its body. And that's not the first picture I've seen and from other people. And the pictures of boats, when people were pulling them out of the river this year, what was on the bottom of their boats. I mean, this is our community. This is our economic livelihood. This cannot continue. So, what can we do? First of all, go to these events that the Watershed Council is doing across the Merrimack Valley. They're reaching out to let people know everywhere about what's going on with these CSOs. And we need to continue to push EPA and DEP to accelerate action steps in these consent orders. I feel like these consent orders have been around for quite a while, but they're not really moving forward. So what happens if I don't do anything? So you get fined $25,000 versus spending $62 million to do something, right? I mean, we've got to do something else here and pushing these agencies forward. We need to form committees. You need to be part of a committee in your community that is advocating with your legislators to stop this from happening and finding other ways that we can address stormwater and additional runoffs. We also need to advocate for better data. We don't have good data. I've toured the plants and talked to the operators, I get data every time there's a CSO activation in Haverhill. I don't know what I'm reading. I don't know what this means, in terms of these complicated, I know that I can understand millions per gallon of this, but it's all coded by outflow pipes and all this other stuff. Give me something in common language. We released X amount of untreated sewage into the river, which means that for the next 72 hours, you better warn your community about boating, swimming, fishing, whatever. That's what we need to know right now to protect the health and economics of our community, particularly the health. I know that Markey and Senator Markey and Warren and Congressman Moulton have talked about reaching out to bring New Hampshire legislators into the process so that we can have better conversations about this. And I think that's really important. And I think, again, we need to make a better connection between what's happening with these CSO activations and health impacts, too. So I know that that's pretty intensive and fairly concerning in terms of CSOs, but if you step back to the beginning of my presentation, we've done so much in Newburyport and the greater Newburyport area, as citizens, really concerned about what's happening with climate change, and have educated so many people in our community. You go to one of these storm surge events, there's 200 people there. I'm so impressed. It's wonderful. And we need to continue to move things forward because information keeps changing and we have to be ready and prepared and to be deliberate about things that we're going to do to protect our communities. So continue to participate. Keep getting educated, partner with people who share the same causes, and by all means, we have to champion our successes. Thank you.